Yu-Gi-Oh! Has been around for more than 20 years now, and with that comes a variety of ways to play in both casual and competitive settings. I myself have been a casual player for a number of years now, and looking to experience more of what the game has to offer. So join me on this journey as I make the jump from casual to competitive. Hello and welcome back to From Casual to Competitive. I hope you're ready to join me, got your cup of teas ready, and are ready to dive straight back into this. So as a quick recap, in episode 1 we spent time just showing off the decks and what they could do, as well as potential routes to take them down. And now we're going to do what is virtually the most important thing in starting to update our decks. Research. Whilst making sure we have the right combo pieces is incredibly important, what's also important is actually our ability to play them and also play through our opponent's boards, as our combo pieces might not be able to do anything if our opponent has already got a full board in play. So over the past few weeks I've actually been researching what I've seen as the most identifiable meta decks and the decks that have seen the most heavy representation to make sure I understand how to combat. And I'm happy to report that my research bore fruit, and I was able to find recommendations and potential strategies on how to combat each of them using hand traps and other potential cards, which is what the rest of this video is primarily going to focus on. But before we go any further, I have a little something I want to show you.
And what I've got to show you is these little beauties. So I picked these up online last week because I wanted to essentially get something to kind of commemorate the new series, but also show off the bling of these new decks, really give them something to actually look really cool in. So I found these deck boxes that have basically the Toon Egyptian gods on, which I think is really cool. I'm gonna push off these two to the side for a second. I'm gonna really highlight, I love the obelisk design, it looks so cool. But if we open it up, protective coating, and I love the design of this box. Core deck, put our side deck in here, and then we have a little dice tray as well. This is just so awesome. I love these boxes. All three boxes are of the same design, and yeah, our decks are going to look really cool in this. I don't know which one I'm going to use for which deck. It'll probably be somewhat random, but this is going to be something we can show our decks off in.
But moving away from show and tell now, we're going to take a look at what essentially each of the meta decks this format are looking like, especially post Power of the Elements. And here they are. Now we're going to go through them one by one in terms of what I can do exactly to combat them and what kind of the key focus of the strategy is. And do bear in mind that this list is not exhaustive, but this is just what I've seen to be sort of the most heavily represented and better decks of the format, as it were. So first up, we got the fabulous birds that is Fluunderees. So this deck seems to primarily focus on getting M-Pen and Barrier Statue out, which basically negates attack position monsters' special effects, as well as just special summons with Barrier Statue. This is then backed up by the use of the field spell, as well as cards like Riser and Apex Avian. Combine this with the interactions they can do on your turn if your opponent is playing them, this deck can be annoying to go up against. So in terms of stopping or stunning Flunder, it seems like Ash Blossom isn't necessarily the best way to go, because ultimately the effects can be chain blocked, and cards like Effect Failure and Impermanence can potentially be dodged by them. So the better cards to use seem to be a combination of using Ghost Ogre for the field spell, Artifact Lancier to prevent their ability to banish, and Droll and Lockbird to essentially prevent their ability to search. But overall effect negators like Ciphering Gamma, as well as cards like Solemn Strike, which can potentially get rid of their normal summon, is also quite key as well, as if you're able to prevent the normal summon and its effect from going off, the deck can sometimes struggle to come back from that. So those cards seem to be our best bet in the Flunder matchup. Next up is Sword Soul, which focuses as a strategy a lot on synchro monsters including Baronne de Fleur, as well as its own Sword Soul Chi-Chao, and Chen Yin. The combination of these monsters as well as cards like Sword Soul Blackout can overwhelm your opponents in terms of attack power and effect negations. It does seem like there's a few ways to stop the deck though, with one being Token Collector to eat up the tokens summoned by Long One and Moye, as they are the tuners that ultimately get them into the Synchro summons. It also seems like a well-timed Ash Blossom on the Surge cards would do the trick as well. And if all else fails, send that Meteor downwind Nibiru. But we've also got to make sure that we have got follow-up plays, as they can have some recoverability, so using cards like Dimensional Barrier may see us for this. So there are definitely options we can add in to combat Sword Soul, no problem. Following on from Sword Soul, we've then got Punk, which seems to have several variations, some including the Adventure Engine, some including Therions, and then some being pure. But it still seems that the main aim here is Synchro Summon. Based on what I've seen, it seems like the best way to combat this is blocking their Fusion Summon either through the use of Effect Failure and Permanence, or just stopping the Hulk plays that go into this. Then, as an alternative, we've got cards like Dark Ruler No More and Forbidden Droplet, so if they've already gone into their board, you can break it. Finally, similar to Sword Soul, as it's a Synchro deck, using cards like Dimensional Barrier to stop them from Synchro Summoning is another way to combat this deck. The next deck we have up is Eldritch, which is by no means a new deck, but is still very prominent due to its trap usage, as well as its recovery game and its ability to grind out games to a slow halt. Not to mention the protection it gets over the set spells and traps through the use of Lord of the Heavenly Prison. Now, given that this is an older deck, people have had more time to analyse specifically what cards can be used to combat it. Using cards like Evenly Matched, There Can Be Only One and Royal Decree can really stop their board setup. Also, banishing the main focus of the deck, which is Eldritch himself, through the use of DD Crow can work as well. Blocking the banishment of the traps and spells through cards like Artifact Lancier and Dimension Shifter can also work, because it means they don't need to get those follow-up plays. But also, since it is ultimately a very back row heavy deck, using spell trap destruction like Twin Twisters, Cosmic Cyclone and Harpy's Feather Duster is sure to be a feather in the cap as well. Moving on, we then have Despia Branded. I do actually have a more casual version of this deck build, which I would love to upgrade for competitive play, but we'll work on that another time. So this deck does predominantly focus on fusion summons through the use of the field spell as well as Branded Fusion, and those are just two of the cards to keep an eye out for, particularly with Branded Opening and Branded in red, and if they're able to get the fusion monsters out, Mirror Jade and Guardian Chimera can prove to be very difficult to deal with at times. Based on the research I've done, it seems like the best way, or most people's suggestion to go, is to use Ash Blossom either on the Alibur or the Branded Fusion, as this can really stop the deck in its tracks. But there are other options as well, like Ghost Bell and the Haunted Mansion, Dimensional Barrier as well just to call Fusion, or Rivalry of Warlords, considering the deck does have a lot of types to use. And similar to the other decks that we've looked at so far, board breakers like Dark Ruler No More, and Lightning Storm and Forbidden Droplet, and even Super Poly can be very viable options here. So we definitely have options to deal with this one. Now, the next one is a big one, which is Spright. Having only been released a couple weeks ago in Power of the Elements, people are still trying to figure out certain things about this deck, and so not all the best reactions are going to be known about it just yet. But based on what I've seen, just being able to set up with cards like Spright Red, Totally Awesome, and Spright Carrot as negates on board can really stop your opponent from playing the game. Now, more and more variants of this deck are going to emerge over the coming weeks, but currently at the moment it seems like the best hand trap targets are going to be Ash Blossom, Ghost Ogre, Gamma and Imperm, particularly for the use on Gigantic Spright, and for Ash Blossom Spright Starter as well. But I did see that using Ghost Bell on Spright Elf and Ronin Totem, as well as DD Crow for Ronin Totem, seems to be a good suggestion too. But other cards to consider in stopping Spright are things like Deck Devastation Virus, which can just potentially shut the deck down, Skill Drain blocking its card effects, and then also using cards like There Can Be Only One and Dark Ruler No More. And then some interesting suggestions through Winged Dragon of Wrath Sphere Mode, Gozen Match, Artifact Scythe, and a card I'd actually never heard of prior to making this video, Mischief of the Gnomes. All of these are viable options. We're just going to have to test them out to see which ones work best with the decks we're using. And the final deck that we're looking at is another one from Power of the Elements, which is the Tier Elements. This deck has a really interesting reliance on milling that reminds me a lot of Light Swords. but they mill to get their fusion summons. Now, similar to Spright, people are playing a lot of different variants of this. There's the pure, there's the branded, as well as a punk chaos build, which seems quite interesting to me actually. But the biggest weakness that this deck seems to have at the moment seems to be its reliance on milling, because you never know what you're going to get. There's a lot of RNG in there, so it's a bit up in the air as to what your end board is actually going to be if you're playing it. But specific cards that I've seen used to combat it are Ash Blossom, particularly on the fusion effects and on Havness, and then the use of Imperm on Rhino Heart and Kick Kalos. But there's other options that people have used as well, like Dimensional Barrier, Macrocosmos, Abyss Dweller, Shadow Imprisoning Mirror seems to shut down this deck completely, and then there's obviously other board breaker options like Dark Ruler No More. This deck is definitely going to be one to keep an eye on though, just because of the Ishizu cards that are coming out in the future. These had a profound impact on the OCG, so it'll be interesting to see if they have the same impact in the Tea.C.G. But that's going to do it for the initial analysis I've done just based on the research over the past few weeks. However, I am also aware, just based on the European Championship that happened over this past weekend, that Rika's son Avalon has got quite a few eyes on it at the moment, as that actually did win the event, so we'll be taking a look at that soon as well. But now that we've actually got an idea of some cards that we can include to combat the current meta and the most represented decks, it's time to do some updates. And this week we are primarily focusing on the Phantom Knights deck. This is primarily because in this second week we're looking to just get to grips with the meta, and I think the Phantom Knights deck in its original form is the most competitively viable one available to us that will give us the best feel for how the meta is.
Okay, so going into the deck updates, the first thing I'm going to go over is cards I've actually removed from the main deck. So you'll remember from the deck profile we had a package of 3 Ash Blossom, 2 Effect Veiler and 2 DD Crow. So I'm actually removing the 2 copies of DD Crow just because I think the card has quite niche usage in this format at the moment as far as I can tell, but it is gone but not forgotten, as I am maintaining it in the side deck. Now, going for the cards that I'm actually adding in to the main deck, we are adding in our 3 copy of Ghost Ogre. Just based on the research, this seems like it's going to be a very decent hand trap, just being able to stop things like Fluundere's map, as well as other monster effects on field, plus the fact that it is searchable off of E-Telly, and it's a level 3 as well, so actually it kind of makes an additional combo piece. We've then got 2 copies of Evenly Matched, which I'm adding into the main deck. For me, this is something I want to try out. Evenly Matched came up quite a bit in my research, and I just think it could be potentially an interesting card to use here. And then the final card I'm adding in is a 3rd copy of Fogblade. I've got 2. I wanted to add a 3rd in just because it is such a good card. It is an effect negate and attack stop, and my deck has easy ways to basically get rid of it once it's in play. So those are the cards I'm adding into the main deck. So I took 2 out and I've added 6 in, so it's become a card count of 44. I still think that's okay, but if it messes up the ratios too much, we can always go back in and update it. Then finally we're going to go into our now newly constructed side deck. So the obviously first up, we're talking about it just now, 2 copies of DD Crow. We've got 3 copies of Artifact Landseer just to deal with any decks that do banish, which is quite a few of them at the moment, so I just think that will be very useful. 2 copies of Droll and Lockbird to stop the searches. 2 copies of Nibiru to more deal with the combo heavy decks. I'm a bit on the bench about Nibiru because as much as Nibiru does hurt my opponent, it does have the potential to hurt me as well if I've got no follow-up, so we'll have to see how that one goes. Got 3 copies of Dark Ruler No More as a board breaker. I'm very interested to see how the deck actually does in the games I'm going to play today, to see as to whether I actually need to perhaps main this, but we shall see. 1 copy of Red Reboot for that trap negation, and 2 copies of Dimensional Barrier, which I think will just do a lot against the Fusion and Synchro heavy decks that are in the game at the moment. So that's kind of what the side deck is looking like at the moment. It's the first time I've constructed one, so I think this covers a lot, but if there's any changes that you guys have suggestions on, then I'm obviously willing to hear them.
And with that being said, we're going to move into some games now. So going into game 1 of the first match, and in this match I actually ended up just going up against Crusadia, which was a lot of fun to go up against. It's a deck I haven't seen in a while. So I proceed to go off just on the basis of Torn Scales, going into my standard Phantom Knight board, ending ultimately on Double Fog Blade face down, Caught by the Grave face down as well, Ash Blossom in hand, IP Masquerena on board along with Cherubini, so I can set up for Access Code Talker during my opponent's turn, and I think I'm sitting pretty, but boy was I about to get a rude awakening, as soon as his turn came through and down comes the Kaiju on my Masquerena and a Lightning Storm to feed off my back row, so I could do very little to stop him going off from here, and although I tried to slow him down, he was still able to go straight into Equimax and ultimately deal me the 12k damage, thanks to a triple tactical talent he did have in hand. This game was actually just really useful for showing me how much I need to consider actually keeping cards in hand at times. But we live and learn, so we're going to go straight into game 2 here, and this hand is not exactly what I was hoping it was, but to be fair, not that I knew at the time, it looked like he drew even worse. So I try to set up as best I can using a combination of E-Telly, summoning the Ghost Ogre to go into Cherub, and kind of going into the standard plays from there. But the game didn't go too much further than that, realistically. He tried using Dropless to block off Bardish's effect, but I was still able to extend off. Not as much as I would like to, but I was still able to at least get some damage in. Going into his turn, I realised just how much he must have bricked, considering he played the Pot of Desires. Now I played the Scythe down just in case he had Harpy's Feather Duster, but that did allow him to go into triple tack. But luckily, I was able to Solemn Strike at the time of the Magius, which then stopped him from extending any further, and he had nothing in hand left to use, so 1-0. Now it's worth noting here that between games 1 and 2, I did side in the double Nibiru that I have, and probably just as well I did, because ultimately that is what decided game 3 here. So he's going through his standard Crusadia plays. I do have Nib at the ready, it's just a case of the timing of it, because I don't want to trigger it off too early in case he can go through. But when he plays Masquerena, I do it, and that actually does end up winning me the game. Holy crap, we actually won our first match! So going into match number 2, I did actually have a bit of a high after the Crusadia win. I was not prepared for what I was going up against here. I initially thought that I was just going up against Predaplants, but it actually ended up being a blend of Predaplants, Branded, and Therian, which actually was a really cool combination to see. I think Revzcards did a similar combo, so I don't know if this was kind of based off of that or with his own spin on it. But it was a really cool deck to just observe, and I'm actually going to do a real deep dive into it post this video, as I couldn't do anything. I didn't have any hand traps in hand or any interruption in which I could stop him, but it was just so cool actually seeing the board that he set up, as there was very little I could actually do about it, particularly with Mirror Jade in play, which, as you kind of observed from the earlier segment of the video, is just kind of a bit of a powerhouse in and of itself. I was able to get Cherubini, but then he went straight into Branded Exile, which was a card I'd never seen before, and he kind of super polyed it into Starving Venom. And as much as I tried to do stuff from here, I was very limited in what I could actually do, as he was able to negate my Phantom Knight effects with the Therian, and Mirror Jade was able to get rid of my Artifact Dagda in the end phase. So I couldn't really do anything to stop him, but I didn't want to scoop at this point because I wanted to see if he did anything else, just to observe. But he had enough damage on board, so he just went for it. So on to game 2. So I went first here, but this is always a lesson to make sure you don't click too fast and you take your time with it, as I did end up misplaying by going into Masquerena instead of Cherubini. I was able to thankfully play around it, but it shouldn't have really been an issue, and the board I played as a result was, in my opinion, suboptimal, but I was able to do some setup, get up break sword ready for potential next turn, and 2 fog blades. And that's apparently all I needed, because the 1 fog blade stopped him for getting to a Luba, and then on Lubellion I triggered the other fog blade. He initially thought apparently that Called by the Grave could be used on any card, so it was a bit of a misread on his part, but I mean, I misplayed as well, so it's easily done. But from there I was just able to go off. As much as he did get the Aluber back, I was able to go into Arc Rebellion Dragon from here, and whilst not completely get the damage to finish him off, I was able to set up ready for next turn by pitching the Silent Boots, so that I could then use it to get another Fog Blade to hand, set it ready for next turn, and then I had an Ash and Nibiru in hand just in case. But that was apparently all I needed. Despite the Dark Ruler, I was able to Ash his Lone Fire, and that was enough to end the game. So 1-1 and on to Game 3. Now Game 3 was both a laugh and a decent learning experience, particularly just on the timing of Nibiru. I've sped up the match because what it ultimately boils down to is I went for Nibiru after he set up his board, and unfortunately I just couldn't follow up after that, and he ended up swinging to our ace with a 4000 attack point token, which was just enough to end the game. I unfortunately just didn't have anything. Now in hindsight I could have just played something down to defend against the token, but I think knowing now what I do, I think he would have played through it anyway. So that was an unfortunate match loss, but you know what, I'll take it as a learning experience, and it was still an incredibly fun game and a more hilarious outcome. Now going into the third match, I was actually up against Plunder Patrol, which I'd never been up against before. Now I've sped up my turn just for the purpose of getting through to his turn, and there was nothing overly different about the combo on my turn. Despite playing for an Ash Blossom, I was able to set up my board pretty successfully, even going into Levi Air Dragon so I could get the Ancient Cloak back into the graveyard for future plays. But I was able to set up the Masquerader, and that's all she wrote. So going on to his turn, he's able to fire off a lot of the Plunder Patrol plays. And getting into Access Code Talker on his turn, I was able to set up a pretty decent defense, as Access Code Talker was now impervious to destruction. But he was still able to massively go off. Now, I found this deck really interesting in terms of like the different interactions that were coming out of it. Now, I did try to Effect Veiler as Link Monster, which he tried to call by, and I negated the monster still with Fog Blade. He was able to get the Fusion Monster out, but then unfortunately for him, I had a Solemn Strikeout which was able to block his effect, and from there was no real recovery for him. I was just able to further extend into the plays, and unfortunately for myself and the experience there, he did just actually quit fully out of the match, so that is a technical match win for us. And the final match of the video is up against Spright. Now I did try to block one of his early plays, but he was still able to go off and set up something of a Spright board here, ending on Spright Elf and Spright Jet with 2 face downs. So going into my turn, I tried to cautiously play through some of the Spright cards because I know that they have a monster negate and a spell negate, which he was able to set up both on my turn. So I knew I was going to have to be cautious about this, and I just kept on trying to play through as much as I could, which in the end I was actually very successful with, and I was able to go into Arc Rebellion basically playing around certain of the effects and baiting them. So with that, I then passed it over to him after I'd set down the Fog Blade, and luckily for me, I was able to time the Fog Blade just right on the Gigantic Spright effect, and he gave up, having nothing else to play. Going into Game 2, we drew, and he quit. I'm not really sure what to think of this, because looking at the replay, he had cards in his hand to play with, as did I. So I'm not really sure why he quit, and I'm unsure whether to take this really as a match win, as realistically looking at the cards in our hand, it could have gone either way. So I will add it to the score for now, but I might think about it a bit more, and it also depends on what you as viewers think too. But that is going to do it for the games, and to my great surprise, we actually came out with a positive ratio of 3-1 in terms of winning. I'm actually quite happy with that, to be honest. As much as it is a bit of a surprise because I half expected to lose most of the games just whilst I was getting used to things, it shows I'm going in the right direction and also gives me some things to think about regarding how the deck performed and how the cards I swapped out in terms of the side decking performed as well. Overall, I think they did very well, and that shows in a great positive light, I think, in the games, but we're never going to stop learning, and we're always going to keep an eye out for new cards to add. So there's a lot to take away from this, but it's reassuring to know that we are on the right track as far as cards and considerations goes, and now it's just a case of applying that to the other two decks. Going forward into future weeks, we are going to be focusing not only on sort of the hand trap parts and the defensive parts of the decks, but also the combo pieces. We didn't really do anything with the primary combo pieces in the Phantom Knights deck this week, so we'll be looking at that in a future week. But also going forward into future weeks, hopefully we'll be able to make this a bit more game and update orientated. There's not going to be the massive research section like there has been in this one, so the videos will probably be a bit more condensed going forward as well. But if you have stuck it out to the end of the video, thank you very much for watching. You are a star. And to the subscribers, thank you so much. Honestly, I never expected when I started this I would get any subscribers, so it was a very pleasant surprise. But if you want to see anything different from these videos or want to see more from these videos, then please do let me know. It's great to hear from you, and feedback is always appreciated. And with that being said, I think we'll close it up here. Again, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Take care now.